Ministry of Health and the Federal Council on Narcotics, they got together a panel of scientists, psychologists, sociologists studying the communities. They did a whole battery of tests over 2 years, and their findings were glowing about the ayahuasca religion. And they studied three. They studied us, the Santo Daime. They studied Barquinha. Barquinha is a very, very beautiful ceremony. It comes from the same man, Mestre Neo, but one of his followers, or this is the story, one of his followers drank a dose of daime, and he fell to the ground with a vision. And he went and he told his vision to Mestre, and he said, very good, go and start your own line. His line incorporates much more of the Umbanda, which is the Afro-Brazilian tradition. So their ceremonies will begin, everyone's sitting down, they wear different outfits, in fact they dress like sailors, and the whole room has these boat icons all around. And they'll sit down and they'll do their psalms, they call them salmos. They'll sing for a couple of hours, and then they'll go outside and they'll do dance work. But their dance is very different, and they'll go around with the women in a circle on the inside and the men in a circle on the outside. And they'll walk around like this, as if they're on a boat. And then people will start to incorporate spirits, and they'll incorporate a series of spirits, and they could be anything from Lepobelios, which are the old African slave spirits, and they'll walk like this, as if they're in the chain gang. And these guys are amazing. They will bend over and they'll sit down and smoke a tobacco pipe, and then people will come up to them and ask them questions. So like atendimento, they'll attend people. In fact, when I was sick, I went to go and see one of these people. I'm going to tell you about what happened there later. So this is one of the lines, and then the other line is the UDV, and the UDV is the União de Vegetal. And they do things quite differently. They sit in chairs for the whole ceremony, and they drink their doses, and then they spend part of it listening to music and part of it talking. Again, very, very beautiful. I have a great deal of respect for them. So anyway, these two government bodies studied the communities, and they came back with these quotes. The liquid is brownish with an extremely acrid, repulsive and nauseating taste, which in both our cases provoked serious nausea and vomiting. In my case, it also caused serious diarrhea. Moral and ethical standards of behaviour, similar in every respect to those which exist and are recommended in our society, are observed within the various sects. At times in an even stricter manner. Respect for the law is always appeared to be emphasised. The ritual use of tea does not appear to be disruptive or to have adverse effects on the social interactions of the various sex followers. On the contrary, it appears to orient them towards seeking social contentment in an orderly and productive manner. The Brazilian government listened to their scientists, as they should do, and they basically legalised ritualistic consumption within certain traditions. I'm just going to talk very briefly about another body of research which was done, which is the Hoasca Project. This was done by Dennis McKenna and a number of other scientists, Charles Grob. What they did was they tested members of the UDV. They tested people against their brothers and sisters who were not drinking, and they found that ayahuasca drinkers scored above average in tests of memory, recall, attention and verbal ability, and they're more optimistic, gregarious and confident than sibling controls. Now that could be as a result of the fact that they're doing a practice, you know, any kind of spiritual work will do good things to your brain. But ayahuasca is very interesting. It affects the plasticity of your brain. So up to 4 weeks later, your serotonin levels are higher than they were before. DMT is structurally similar to serotonin, and it works with the same receptors. Right, in Brazil, there's been a petition for ayahuasca to be recognised as cultural patrimony. In Peru, this has already been granted. So in Peru, ayahuasca is considered somewhat like we consider Buckingham Palace or something like that. And this is an amazing thing to write in the legislation of a country. That plant is known in the indigenous Amazon world as a sage or teacher plant, showing initiates the very fundaments of the world and its components. The effects of its consumption constitute the gateway to the spiritual world and its secrets. It is indispensable to those who assume the role of privileged carriers of these cultures. Can you imagine that in the legislature of England? Right, I'm going to take a little detour and talk about our English legislation very briefly. The Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs. Margaret Thatcher. The Advisory Council was the body charged with looking into various drugs when policy was about to be changed. And Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister when AIDS became an issue. And there was a question, what are we going to do about all these people injecting heroin and giving each other HIV? She didn't want to start a needle exchange project, but the ACMD said, you must. And she said, okay, because she was obeying the law of the country. This man, he decided on his own to outlaw mushrooms. And he did that by going around the ACMD and getting together police chiefs and customs officials, and he actually broke the law of the land. And it wasn't the first time he broke the law of the land. Or maybe the first time, but it wasn't the last time. So he completely ignored the ACMD. Following year, Professor Nutt, who was the head of the ACMD and all-round good chap, in 2009, he said... It's a good headline, that. In 2009, he said something about ecstasy. He said that ecstasy was less dangerous than horse riding and that cannabis shouldn't be rescheduled. And he was sacked for it. 2010, there's a nephedrome scandal. I don't know if you remember that, but we heard that nephedrome was responsible for a young man tearing his scrotum out, hundreds of kids off school, a whole load of lies in the media which produced a big scandal in the country, and then 2 people died and their deaths were blamed on nephedrome. I think it was in April that they died. The following month, nephedrome was banned.
Is it nephedrone or methadrone?
I think it's methadrone.
Well, if the CPS can spell their drugs wrong, then I can as well. A certain drug was banned, and in the following month it turned out they hadn't actually died of it at all. The toxicology reports came out, they hadn't even taken it. And in fact, whilst it had been legal, the number of cocaine deaths had gone down because people were taking this.
That is just ridiculous.
Oh yeah, it's ridiculous. But the next thing is even more ridiculous. The 2011 Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act came into law. It was a bill that became an act, and this is what it did. Before the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act, this is what the drugs law of England, or part of it, looked like. I'm not going to read it all, but it said that the Advisory Council should be made up of people who have wide and recent experience of the misuse of drugs, and persons appearing to the Secretary of State to know about drugs, and these people should be scientists. This act just erased everything from here. It removed all that from our legislature. So now, that's what it says. The members of the Advisory Council, of whom there shall be not less than 20, shall be appointed by the Secretary of State after consultation with such organisations as he considers appropriate. So if you compare that with what happened in Brazil, you know, Brazil is considered a very superstitious country, a country where you have a church on every street corners, where you have shamans and healers and exorcists, and a very, very vibrant religious culture. And they saw it fit to get a whole battery of tests done and study one of the drugs that had presented a legal problem in depth. The English government decided to sack their scientists. It makes you want to write to your MP. So how did I get involved? Are there any more questions at this point?
Linda sereia que